If you could describe the season finale of Game of Thrones in one word, how would you describe it?
Disappointing.
So Game of Thrones just ended, and if we're being honest, it kind of sucked. Despite what you may think by looking at the title of this video, I actually used to like this show. I read the first book back in middle school, which I definitely should not have been allowed to do. Then I started the fourth book before I realized that I was making a mistake. The books didn't really have numbers on them back then, and I got confused, alright? But the point is that was a long time ago, and I never could have anticipated back then that these nerdy-ass books would spawn the most popular show ever. I mean, it's so popular that Elmo even watches it.
Elmo thinks that you two need to respect each other.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit?
I think this show is definitely a step above other shows of its type. I mean, think about it. How many fantasy shows even come close to the quality of Game of Thrones? But the problem is, this show really dropped the ball. Like, it really screwed up.
Have you shot your final scenes yet? And are you happy with how things ended?
Yeah.
She didn't say yes. You didn't say yes.
Best season ever! It's the best. It's the best season ever.
This show fell victim to something I always warn about. Bad writing. I talk about bad writing in like every video I've ever made. And now that we've all seen the finale of this show, I hope you realize why writing is important. Because this show has pretty good acting, some pretty good cinematography, incredibly impressive effects, moments of really fun editing, and yet everybody is mad because the writing is bad. And honestly, that's the only thing wrong with this show. But it's so bad that it really makes it hard to appreciate the rest of the stuff. You know how many movies or shows are saved by having good writing? Hell, it's the only reason Woody Allen still has a career. If you watch Game of Thrones all the way through from beginning to end, it feels like everything that was important at first just kind of gets thrown away. The show just morphs into something bizarre. The themes and ideas that were once important are now completely gone and replaced with more generic fantasy tropes. Something just don't feel right anymore, and I'm not the only one who thinks that. So, let's take a look at why. Oh, and by the way, if it wasn't obvious...
You're spoiling it! You're spoiling everything!
Now, if you're a weirdo who's never watched Game of Thrones because you don't mind missing out on cultural media milestones, I'll explain the general premise for you. The story revolves around a bunch of families in the land of Westeros. Westeros is a fantasy land with dragons and magic, but dragons and magic are pretty rare. The aforementioned families are all fighting one another because shit happens and the king dies, and it's a series about political intrigue, realistic complex characters, and boobs. However, most of these concepts kind of get fucked up by the end of the series. It kind of stops being a show about characters and politics. Characters used to get by on their wit and creativity, but now it's just fighting. Remember how I said magic and dragons were pretty rare? Well, not anymore. When the writers don't know what to do, we either get magic, a dragon, or a fight. And sometimes we get all three at once. And that's because the writers are not very good at writing this show. And yes, I know that sounds a little weird, so I'm gonna explain. The Song of Ice and Fire series is written by George R.R. Martin, and a good 80% of the show is adapted from these books, and about 75% of that is actually really good. Now, the show itself is written by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, or as a lot of people like to call them, D&D. Now, for what it's worth, they are pretty good at adapting this material for the screen. They have a good way of cutting the unnecessary stuff, accentuating the important elements that might not be immediately important, and presenting it in a fresh and engaging way. Now, a lot of people shit on these guys because of the recent seasons, but let's not forget that the good stuff is partly their work too. So if these guys are pretty good at adapting existing material, then what's the problem? Well, the problem is that around season 4 and 5, they ran out of books. See, unfortunately for them, the books aren't finished, and when they signed on to do the show, they probably thought the series would be over by then. But then we all found out the hard way that George R.R. Martin is kind of lazy. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that because you can't really get a read on the guy. The first 3 books have a mere 2 years between each of them, and that's about normal. That's a pretty quick pace. Then there are 5 years between books 3 and 4, then 6 years between books 4 and 5, and book 5 came out 8 years ago with no release on book 6 in sight. And there's still supposed to be a book after that one. Now, my personal theory has always remained that George kinda knew he wasn't gonna be able to finish the books in time for the show, so he just decided to wait for the show to finish. which is honestly the better marketing choice, even though I don't know if he really cares about that. I mean, think about it. What if the show is in like season 6, way after they're done adapting the books directly? Then he releases a book with completely different stuff in it. Who the fuck is gonna read it now when the show's still on? It would just be confusing to consume 2 stories named the same thing, but with different shit happening. I think he knows that the show is like the most popular thing ever, and if he releases the book, it's just unnecessary competition. It's better to just do the books after the hype of the show has died down a bit. But either way, the point is that D&D ran out of books. They had a few tidbits from George, but that's about it. But outside of those few elements, the show just had to start making shit up. And these guys aren't really good at that. Once they started writing original content, we got some of the worst plot lines in Game of Thrones history. We also got some of the worst dialogue.
You want a good girl, but you need a bad pussy.
Not to mention, fight scenes also start popping up randomly to distract the viewer and fill up time. Game of Thrones used to have like 1 fight a season, if you were lucky. But in the later seasons, it feels like fights just get added for no reason. Why doesn't he have a shirt on? This whole scenario reminds me of Full Metal Alchemist, where the original anime ran out of manga to adapt, so they just started making shit up. And it got pretty weird. Game of Thrones went the exact same way, except we don't have any books to show us what we're missing out on. But if you ask me, it's obvious.
Here, north of the wall, and then back here again. He climbed on the fucking dragon and fought. What kind of person climbs on a fucking dragon? A madman! What kind of person climbs on a fucking dragon? A madman!
I mean, look at the whole Hodor reveal. This is one of the last things that was based on material directly provided by George, and it's so fucking weird and cool and creative. Like, Bran sends his mind back in time and, like, time splices young Hodor's mind, so then he just damages his brain forever. I can't even explain it properly. It's so conceptual and strange that I know these goobers didn't make it up themselves. Unfortunately, the show just stopped being creative once they had to do it themselves. Before, it was a nuanced fantasy series that subverted your expectations in interesting ways. The main character from season 1 is your traditional fantasy protagonist. He's so righteous and good-natured that he almost solves all of the problems of the series right away. And you can't have that, so they kill him. One trope inversion that I've always loved is with revenge and how the series deals with it. In a traditional fantasy story, we're taught to root for characters that are driven by vengeance, because we see it as justice. You know, if you do something bad, you should be punished for it. But A Song of Ice and Fire takes this and twists it. Vengeful characters are almost always punished.
I'll kill them all. Every one of them. I'm gonna kill them all.
We have to get the girls back. And then we will kill them all.
They're usually blinded by their lust for revenge, and more often than not, they pay a steep price for it. Arya's whole deal in earlier seasons is about her wanting to exact her vengeance on the people that ruined her life, and it's kinda childish. Every character she interacts with tells her that her goal is stupid and that it's not worth it. And for most of her arc, it kinda looks like it's going to allow her to shed her old ways and give up on her petty quest. But then the writers kind of forgot what they were doing with her, and she becomes the fucking Punisher. She does eventually learn to give up on her quest, but not because it's petty and wrong, but because everybody she wanted to kill is already dead. Everybody else is punished for vengeance, but Arya gets to walk away scot-free. In fact, almost every main character is ruined by the end of this show. Their personal stories become forgotten, and they kind of become the standard version of themselves. It's like the writers took the base qualities of each character and just used those for the rest of the show and decided they didn't want to write any more character arcs. I honestly can't think of a single character that has a good arc in this season aside from Theon. The characters also become incredibly stupid. I mean, just listen to the writers explain why Dany couldn't see the fleet of pirate ships before her dragon gets shot down by them.
While Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
She forgot? Yeah, the characters are all stupid. Every single one of them. It's like everybody dropped like 20 IQ points in these last 2 seasons. So let's go ahead and look at all the characters and how the writers fucked them up by the end of the show. Daenerys Targaryen. Alright, let's just get this girl out of the way early, because most people are probably here to watch me shit on her. Dany obviously suffers the most in this season. She goes from being a slightly petulant but confident young ruler to a megalomaniacal tyrant in just a few episodes. Yes, a few episodes. Now, there are a few people out there saying that her fall to the dark side was foreshadowed, and these people are not correct. Dany's fall to the dark side is more abrupt and jarring than Anakin Skywalker's, and somehow she still has a higher body count than him. Daenerys' whole arc has been about her proving that she can break the cycles of the world. You know, the name Breaker of Chains is supposed to be literal and figurative. She wants to break the cycle of her family line. Her dad and brother were fucking nut jobs, and she wants to prove that she can be a powerful ruler without being a tyrant. She knows that Westeros has been at war for a long time and that the people ruling the land have been corrupt and evil. She wants to prove that the land can thrive under the right person. She wants to end the cycle of suffering that everybody's been experiencing. Yeah, they totally fucked her up. Now I'll be honest, I never really liked Daenerys. Part of the reason that I never finished the rest of the books is because I hate enjoying a chapter and then turning the page and seeing this shit. She's the most boring character to follow, but that doesn't mean I wanted her arc to get thrown in the dumpster. She goes from being normal, confident, strong Daenerys in one episode, to being kinda sad that nobody in Westeros is her friend, to killing countless innocent people. That's a pretty drastic jump, if we're being honest. Now, the current theory is that George told D&D that this is what was gonna happen to Daenerys by the end of the story. And honestly, I'm on board with that. I think that's the case. But if that is the case, they should have known to actually cultivate this arc from long before this, because as it stands, it comes out of nowhere. Actions speak louder than words, and Dany has always talked a lot of shit, but her actions are completely separate. Threatening your enemies with fire and blood is way different than killing innocent people indiscriminately. If your only example of her having a dark streak is that she executes people who betray or disobey her, well, I got news for you. Every fucking character does that in this world. Jon does it all the time. The first lesson that the series teaches us in the very first episode is that if you are an authority figure, it's your responsibility to do what you gotta do, even if that means carrying out an execution. This act is never shown as a bad thing in this series, ever. So no, I do not accept it as foreshadowing for her turning evil, when at this point it's basically a societal norm. Now yeah, if you really wanted to make her evil, it's totally doable. The seeds are there, but they haven't grown into something that's convincing. As far as we know, based on everything that the show has actually shown us from her, she's been nothing but kind and benevolent when it comes to innocent people. I also want to point out that Stannis only killed one innocent child, and every viewer of the show hated him for it. He was seriously the most hated character on the show, and yes, this is the same show that has this fucking kid.
I'm not tired!
A lot of people are saying, oh, well, since she got to Westeros, her friends have died and nobody likes her.
Okay.
Arya has lost more family and friends than Daenerys, and she isn't a mass murderer. Okay, well, she kind of is, but in a different way. This is some of the most blatant character assassination that I've ever seen on a TV show. And it's no wonder why everybody immediately turned on the show after this moment. It's not just because women and children are being toasted by our main character. We don't really care that something upsetting is happening. It's Game of Thrones. Nobody really gives a shit about that. The problem is that we're being told that this is a genuine character arc when it's really not. In fact, I can go ahead and fix most of these problems with just one solution. If you completely removed the Bells of Surrender, then the scene would make a little more sense. Think about it, what if Daenerys was, trying to take over the city, but Cersei just wouldn't surrender? Like, no matter what happened, Cersei just wouldn't do it. Then Daenerys has to make a choice. She can either give up, which she probably wouldn't do, or just keep attacking the city, which would put innocent lives at risk. That's a much more natural and reasonable solution than her hearing that the whole city has surrendered and just deciding to kill them anyway.
But perhaps it's good the people see that Daenerys Stormborn made every effort to avoid bloodshed.
I'm ghost riding the whip! Crazy taxi!
Bran Stark. Bran is probably the biggest example of wasted potential in the entire series. He becomes the most powerful being in the entire world, but all he does is sit around and make people feel bad. Any personality that he once had is now stripped away, which could be kinda cool, but they don't actually do anything with it. I honestly thought he was going to reach his ultimate peak in the Battle of Winterfell because his story is completely tied to the White Walkers. He has no purpose outside of that storyline. But even there, he doesn't fucking do anything. The writers don't want to get too weird, so they just leave him be, because they're not confident enough to write weird creative shit that revolves around him. They never use his abilities in creative ways. This is a guy that can see through all of time and space, and the writers have no idea what to do with him. And no, him randomly becoming the king isn't exactly what I wanted either. Again, I expected something a little bit more nuanced. After doing nothing for a whole season, him getting chosen as king feels kind of anticlimactic. Remember, this is the ending that D&D were desperately rushing to get to, and once you remember that, it makes things seem kinda lame. In fact, the whole last episode feels like that. It doesn't really feel like the finale at all. It really feels like they just so desperately wanted to get to this point, and it doesn't feel earned. It just don't feel right. Jon Snow. So if we go off the fact that the writers have reverted to traditional fantasy tropes, then we can say that Jon Snow is the hero of this story. And the other seasons have very much supported that idea as well. And to be honest, I think that this is fine. As the show has drifted away from George's story, Jon has had kind of a hero's journey. But now, he just stands around either making this face or this face. He also suffers from dumb bitch syndrome like everybody else. For some reason, half the characters completely go brain dead once they meet Daenerys, and Jon gets it the worst. After having sex with her one time, he loses all agency as a character. And I should probably mention right now that the Jon and Daenerys romance does not work. As you probably noticed, this show suffers from moving way too quickly. And this is a problem that these writers have. They write the ending, and then the characters just start shifting around it so they can just get to that ending. And this might work in a movie, but in a slow-paced show like Game of Thrones, it does not work. And that's why Jon and Dany don't work. The second that they meet, they have romantic tension. And this is in the second to last season. These characters have never met before. They meet and they fall in love in the span of just a few episodes. Now, no, it's not like they're giving each other goo-goo eyes from the first scene, but as a viewer, you immediately realize, oh yeah, they're gonna fuck. Dany going nutso and the events that unfold around that are all things that depend on their romance. It's basically the most violent love story on television, which could be kind of a cool story, but there should be more to this story. Because Jon's whole purpose in this last season is, oh, my new girlfriend is kind of a dick. He takes a very passive role until the literal last episode. And you know what really wrinkles my balls? The fact that this series does nothing with Jon's previous storylines. Why the fuck did Jon come back to life? What the hell did they need him for? Was killing Daenerys his entire purpose in the whole series? But that isn't even the worst of it. The worst is how Jon being the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna hits a complete dead end in the story. The only thing that comes out of it is Dany getting mad about it. The possibilities of this story thread are endless and the writers do absolutely nothing with it. And what really confuses me is that the only reason these guys got the job to adapt these books into a television show is because they knew who Jon's parents actually were before it was even published in the books.
And he kind of wiped his hands clean on the napkin and he said, so who do you think Jon Snow's real mother is?
This was a test.
It was a test.
It was a Wonka test.
Absolutely a test question.
They predicted it way back then, but they didn't do anything with it. Jon has no significance in the story, he has no stake in the events of the season, and he doesn't do anything until the very end, and then they ship his ass away forever. Jon's entire purpose in these last few seasons was just to kill Daenerys. Remember when I said the writers wrote the ending first? Do you believe me now? Cersei Lannister. Cersei was one of my favorite characters in the whole series. And then she turned into Lex fucking Luthor. Before, she had some subtlety to her character. You never really knew what she was planning. And what's important is that her goals were always a little justified. The thing is, the series has always prided itself on having characters that are not strictly good or evil. And characters that are good or evil are punished. Even when Cersei or another character does something completely fucked up, we understand why. But that is until she goes full Batman villain and bombs her own city. This shit comes out of left field so hard, and thinking back on it always makes me laugh.
Crazy Taxi!
A lot of people like this scene, and yeah, it's kinda cool, but I don't know, I don't really look back fondly on it. On one hand, I commend the writers for doing something batshit insane all on their own, but on the other hand, it doesn't really fit her character or the show for that matter. Once we started nuking cities in my medieval fantasy series, I kinda started to mentally check out. She was always a character of subtlety, and this shit ain't subtle in the slightest. Instead of being cold and calculating, Cersei just kind of turns into a dumb, evil bad guy. And I also should point out that I really don't like it when characters just die from rubble falling on top of them. It's 2019 and we are still dropping buildings on characters like we did with Captain Kirk. And if you know me, I hate two kinds of deaths in media: dying from rubble falling on you, and dying by falling into a pillar of fire. Sandor Clegane. Now this one's kinda short. If you ask me, this guy has no reason being in the show anymore. Eventually this show just decided to start bringing back characters just for fan service. What the fuck is he even here for? He decides to just join the good guys and keep fighting things. His character continues to exist solely because the fans like him. And that's never been how this series operates. When a character's role in this story ends, they're usually killed or kicked out. Yes, the Clegane Bowl is a meme, but it's not why I'm watching Game of Thrones. The final battle between the Hound and the Mountain is indicative of why I don't like this series anymore. It used to be a very tightly written drama about characters with deep unseen motivations, with a rich world and history. But now I'm watching a guy who came back to life fighting another guy who came back to life in a crumbling tower while a dragon goes sicko mode above them. This fight is so stupid. It feels like the fight between Wolverine and Sabretooth from X-Men Origins. Wait a minute. Oh god damn it, you wrote that too? Tyrion Lannister. Now I used to joke that good old Tyrone Lancaster was the main character of Game of Thrones. And he's a character that we can all relate to. He's witty and he survives because he's fucking smart. But then once he teams up with Daenerys, he gets a dose of the dum-dum juice. His whole plan for 2 seasons is to just reason with Cersei. In seasons 1, 2, 3, and 4, he constantly talks about how you can't reason with her. But now for some reason, he thinks that he can just get through to her. He tries like 3 fucking times and it never works. Buddy, listen. She fucking hates you. From her perspective, you killed her mom and her dad and her son and you ran away. She will never listen to you and I don't understand why you think otherwise. This is a series where making mistakes gets you killed. The Red Wedding isn't just some random shit that happened for the hell of it. Tyrion hasn't made a smart choice in almost 4 seasons, but he hasn't been punished even once. In fact, he gets rewarded. I didn't even want him to die either. I just wanted him to be smarter. Why is that so much to ask?
He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people. So, rah. Tyrion is smart, but I guess not that smart.
Euron Greyjoy. Euron is honestly the funniest character in the whole show. The writers decided to just add another person to the story way too late into the series. And I can't even say he was ruined by the end of the series because everything about him just started off being stupid. Whenever he's in a scene, I just never feel like he belongs there. He feels like a guy who just wandered onto set from another show. I honestly think the writers realized that they ran out of bad guys after killing the Boltons. His role is simply to extend the Greyjoy storyline a little bit more and to give Jaime someone to fight before he dies. Brienne of Tarth. Brienne is fine. I think she's fine. I like her. Jaime Lannister. Now this one is personal. You see, Jaime was my favorite character in this entire show. He had so much depth and subtlety to his character in the early seasons. The first thing he does is fuck his sister and throw a little boy out a window. So you might immediately think, okay, he's the villain. But no, that's not quite the case. That assessment is completely intentional. The series wants you to think that he's the bad guy because even the whole universe kind of treats him like a bad guy. He's called the Kingslayer and not really in a nice way. Him killing the Mad King before the story started is kind of seen as a slimy event in the history of the world. But if he hadn't killed the Mad King when he did, everybody would have died anyway. He knew that he wouldn't really go down as a hero, but he did it because he knew it was the right thing. He assassinated an evil dictator, but since he did it in a backhanded manner, everybody hates him. This is meant to play on our initial perception of him. His character is all about reputation. We see his first act pushing a little wee boy out of a window, and we immediately draw an assumption about him, when in actuality he's a guy who constantly puts himself in harm's way to protect other people. The things I do for love is a line that can sum up his entire character. He's fine with putting his own ass in the fire if it protects somebody else. He does dishonorable things for the honor of his loved ones. His selflessness is self-destructive and it tears him apart. This is arguably one of the most complex characters in the entire series. But what do D&D do with this character? Well, after he goes on a journey of self-discovery, he fucks Brienne for no reason, then breaks her heart to go and die with his abusive partner. Awesome. One of the last things he does is he beats Euron in a fight, because for some reason the writers have decided that his new arc is just learning how to fight again. Him losing his sword hand is supposed to be significant for other reasons. And this is a problem that's seen with the Hound as well. Now we have a show where the character resolution is seen in combat. Fight scenes are the ways that we finish up character arcs, instead of the character actually learning something or becoming a different person by the end of it. His whole arc up to this point has shown us that he's meant to leave Cersei forever. He's supposed to shed that life. Personally, I always thought he was destined to kill her. That's been a common theory for a lot of people. But no, he intentionally breaks the heart of someone he cares about, and then the ceiling kills him. Here's a line that he has in his last episode, and it's a line that should solidify the entire problem with his character.
If not for yourself, if not for her, then for every one of the million people in that city, innocent or otherwise.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them. Innocent or otherwise.
So you're telling me that a man who sacrificed his own honor by murdering the Mad King in an effort to save countless innocent people doesn't care about the people?
If your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it?
Did you guys even watch the show? Sansa Stark. Now, Sansa was okay. I started writing this script around episode 2, and I really didn't have a problem with her up to that point. Like, honestly, it's really easy not to fuck her up. Just let her be the strong, independent woman. But no, even she's inconsistent. First of all, she has this really bad moment where the Hound is like, hey, I'm sorry all this bad stuff has been happening to you. And she says, no, it's okay. I like that all the bad stuff happened to me because now I'm a badass. This really shows how these guys don't know how to write women, because they just had one of their main female characters say, yeah, I'm glad I got tortured and sexually assaulted. It made me fucking cool, so I'd go back and do it all again. What the fuck? Then to top it all off, when Jon goes to her and says, hey, this is the most personal secret that I have. Ned Stark, your own father, took this secret to the grave. Don't tell anyone. She fucking tells everybody.
Here's the motherfucking tea.
Sansa spreading Jon's secret is the thing that caused all this bullshit. So yeah, go ahead and defend her actions, but as far as I'm concerned, this is her fault too. Arya Stark. And finally, we have my least favorite character in the entire series, which is kind of sad because I used to really like Arya. Now she stands as a shining example of what I don't like about what this series has become. She's the only character that the rules don't apply to. I'm watching all the main characters struggling and fighting for their lives, and then there's a hard cut to this shit. So many people love Arya, and I legitimately feel like an asshole whenever I complain about her, because it's hard to argue these points without looking like a neckbeard, but I just don't really think this superpowered version of her fits the story. From the end of season 1 into season 2, she decides, I'm gonna be a badass, and I'm gonna learn how to fight, and I'm gonna kill the people I don't like. And that's just her character for the entire show. She just makes a decision, and then the world supports that decision, and then that's just what happens to her. And I don't really like using the term plot armor, but when I see her get stabbed in the gut multiple times and then just walk it off, there's kind of a problem there. When King's Landing is being completely destroyed and Arya's the only person who survives, then I start to see a problem. She teleports from place to place, she doesn't give a fuck about anybody, and she's just too strong. She manages to sneak past all the zombies and all of the Night King's generals, and then she just jumps his ass and shanks him. He dies faster than the Mountain did. They could have just sent Arya to kill Cersei after this. There's no reason to believe that Arya would have had any trouble with it. Just sneak Arya into the city, let her disguise herself as a maid or something, and then just have her stab Cersei. You guys have Batman on your payroll and you don't even care. The problem with Arya's power level is that by all accounts, the show should be aware of how strong she is. But they just act like this is completely normal and it creates a disconnect. On the other hand though, once the series takes a nosedive into Shitsville, I do kinda like her little mini story where she decides that she doesn't like any of the shit that's going on anymore. But to be honest, this was in the last 2 episodes, and I think I just needed something to latch onto. So that's it. That's literally every main character in the show, and they've all been ruined in some way or another. Our conflict doesn't lie with an antagonistic force as much as it does with our main heroes just not agreeing with each other. Sansa is mad at Daenerys because she just doesn't like her. Daenerys is just mad at everybody. Jon is sad because everybody's mad at each other. All of these characters completely lose their sense of reason. And at this point, these people are only alive because they have cunning resilience. They're only here because they're smart, but the show just forgot that they were. So we have a merry band of dumbasses that have been leading the show for a few seasons now. And a lot of people look at season 7 when they bring up how the show lost its mojo. Adult Swim even had a eulogy for the show after its climax episode, and for good reason. This is where the show really started going down a path that it could not recover from. In the climax episode of Season 7, the characters come up with the dumbest plan I've ever heard. The good guys know that the dumb ice zombies are coming to kill everybody really soon, so they have to convince evil Lex Luthor to aid them in the battle. But she doesn't believe in zombies, so their genius plan is to go far north, grab a zombie, and bring it back to her to prove that they're real. The plan itself is so outrageously stupid that I thought it was a joke at first. I'm not kidding. Like, when the characters bring it up, I fully expected someone to say, no, that's ridiculous, let's come up with a real plan. But no, this is the one plan, and they all agree to go along with it. So they all go north to the most dangerous place they could go, they grab a zombie, and all the main characters just safely escape. But then once you get to the end of the show, you realize that they didn't even really have to do this, because Cersei didn't really give a shit about the zombie anyway. By the end of the story, they still have to fight Cersei. When I watched this episode a couple years ago, I realized that this show has really lost its marbles. So when the final season began, I was a little more critical of it than others. Episode 1 came out and it was kinda slow and nothing really happened. And everybody told me, hey man, it's the first episode, give it a break. Then the Battle of Winterfell happens and other people start seeing the problems too. The episode is like dark as hell, you can't see what's happening. The main characters somehow are totally invincible and can't die. The big evil dragon that blew a hole in the wall last season doesn't even prove to be a threat anymore. He can't even melt the rock that Jon Snow is hiding behind. Daenerys manages to destroy an entire city later in the season, but in this episode, she can't really do anything against the zombies. She just can't beat them. You're telling me that this shit wouldn't have worked on the zombies? I mean, give me a fucking break. Plus, much like last season, our main characters decide that they're not done coming up with dumb plans. In the episode before the Battle of Winterfell, the characters decide that their plan to defeat the Night King is to leave Bran out in the open, lure the Night King out, and then they literally never say what the plan is, which causes me to not give a shit about what happens for an hour and a half because I knew everything was gonna be fine anyway.
I think we might live.
Holy shit, he was right. The biggest threat in the series gets killed by Arya, and I always thought that the Night King was going to be defeated by something a little less traditional. Some people were mad that Arya killed him because they wanted Jon Snow to do it, and I don't really agree with that either. The Night King should not have been defeated by a normal person with a sword. If it was that easy, then he probably would have been dead a long time ago. I personally wanted something more creative to happen. I thought Bran was gonna do some weird shit or something. He always has that shitty look on his face like he knows what's gonna happen. I don't know, I just expected something. Think about it. Why was the Night King even in this story? What narrative purpose does he serve? Tell me one reason. One thing they contributed to the finale of this show. If you remove the White Walkers entirely from this last season, the last 2 episodes do not change at all. Now I know for a fucking fact that George is gonna do things at least a little differently. The White Walkers are the first thing you see in the whole series. Both the book and the show start with ice zombies. So I like to think they're pretty fucking important. But as far as the show's concerned, they just had no idea what to do with them. We just rush past the biggest threat in the realm so we can rush past our main character turning evil, and then we rush her getting punished for it, and then the show just ends. I don't even feel like I watched the ending of this show. It was so unsatisfying. To me, this series has always been about breaking tradition, or breaking cycles, as I stated before. The series itself is supposed to break traditions of fantasy storytelling, a story where a hero may die, where you might find yourself rooting for people who do bad things. In a series that pushed the idea that there are no good guys or bad guys, we now have characters that are very obviously good and evil. People are already comparing this to the ending of Lost, but in Lost, every character got a fate that was satisfying, and completed their arcs in meaningful ways. And pretty soon there are going to be a lot of think pieces about how this way of storytelling is genius because it subverts your expectations. And that's dumb. Let's be real, that's stupid. Because there's a way to subvert your expectations in a clever way, and this series has done it before. But now we're at a time where the writers think you're just supposed to do the opposite of what you expect, and that's not how you're supposed to write a story.
You know, if you've planned your book that the butler did it, and then you read on the internet, someone has figured out that the butler did it, and you suddenly change in midstream and it was the chambermaid who did it, then you screw up the whole book.
We hope to kind of avoid the expected, and Jon Snow has always been the hero, the one who's been the savior, but it just didn't seem right to us for this moment.
So if you watched this series and you felt disappointed like me, I guess you shouldn't be too upset, because after all, you do have multiple hundreds of pages of good stuff that you can enjoy. I mean, that's what I'm gonna do now. And I'm sure in a few years we'll get the official, canonical ending. And then maybe like 10 years after that, we'll get a new series on a streaming service or something. And it'll be called A Song of Ice and Fire, the true adaptation. We'll get our Game of Thrones Brotherhood. And then this series will just be seen as the weird fan fiction that it is.